The fire ate oxygen. It consumed everything. For this moment, it had become a moving, breathing thing.
The heavens gathered blackness, and a hurricane of fire swept over the city.
It was the perfect storm.
A great calamity has befallen our beautiful city.
In many ways, the city that we live in today is the city that was shaped by the fire 150 years ago.
It's busy here on Commercial Street as we celebrate Independence Day. Good evening and welcome to our special presentation on Fox 23, The Great Portland Fire. I'm Courtney Cabot.
And I'm Greg Lager. Of course, the mood here is celebratory on this July 4th. Exactly the same mood of Portlanders 150 years ago, July 4th, 1866.
But that day would end in disaster with the greatest fire the young nation had ever seen. Today, a look back at that fire, the destruction, and how the city rose from its ashes.
Now, to the best of our knowledge, that fire pretty much started right here in a building next to a boatyard. It would engulf a third of the city and devastate pretty much everything from here to far off Munjoy Hill, consumed by the flames.
For one night, all the ancient elements conspired against us. Earth, air, water, fire.
The alarms rang out across Portland, a fire of almost unimaginable size and fury sweeping the city. So large, it would become a literal firestorm.
The cinders raining from the sky were its own form of hell and fire.
By the time it was done, homes and churches, banks and businesses, a third of the city from Commercial Street to Munjoy Hill, more than 1,500 buildings, gone.
And what was but yesterday a beautiful and prosperous city is now a scene of desolation and ruins melancholy to contemplate.
The fire began after 4 p.m. on a pleasant July 4th afternoon along the waterfront, near where Becky's Diner is today. The official account, sparked by two boys playing with a firecracker.
The wind coming in from the harbor was just enough to spread it to the next building and thus to the next, and this wooden ancient city down by the harbor began to catch building after building after building after building.
The fire is believed to have had a half an hour's head start before the alarm was fully raised and fire companies could respond. By then, the flames had swept into the nearby Brown Sugar House, the nation's third largest sugar factory, filled with wood, sugar, alcohol, and molasses.
That is where the disaster really struck. It was like a chemical bomb, and the building went up.
That really was the powder keg for the beginning of the fire. And once Brown Sugar House was ablaze, the momentum of the fire really took hold.
But it wasn't just the flames that would doom the city.
It was the perfect storm, really. It was a situation where you had the wind right, the tide out, not sufficient water.
A massive fire fed by a strong wind off the bay, firefighters with no organized city water system, and low tide eliminating the option to run hoses into the bay. The city had only 4 working pumper engines, at the time state-of-the-art. The firefighters, many of them fresh off the Civil War, were well-trained, dedicated, and brave. But on that day, they were outmatched.
And they would make a stand, as they had in battle, and battle those flames, and one by one they would be pushed back. And they'd stand and battle again, and again get pushed back.
Firefighter Frank Merrill, one of the first to respond, gave a first-hand account of the inferno.
As we went up Maple Street, the heat blistered the paint on the hose carriage and burnt off the line of hose lying in the street.
Merrill's crew would fall back to what was Day's toy store, selling fireworks that day, now in flames.
The wind was blowing a gale, and all of a sudden, Day's stock of fireworks began to go off. A big rocket whizzed over my head, and then there came a regular volley. I laid down that pipe and ran. It was all I could do.
The fire department of the city, doing what it could, had to make a running retreat in the face of this wall of flame, growing bigger and bigger, and sweeping as it started in a path diagonally across the city of Portland, toward Munjoy Hill from the harbor.
For more than 12 hours, the fire would rage and spread, first decimating what is now the Old Port, then rolling up India Street and the base of Munjoy Hill, jumping over the Eastern Cemetery, where many Portlanders had fled, hugging the ground among the gravestones.
It's quite a picture, the living taking refuge among the dead.
Then, just before dawn, the fire would die out on the relatively open area of Munjoy Hill, and the sun would rise on a smoldering, devastated city.
A great calamity has befallen our beautiful city. It has been devastated by a conflagration unparalleled in the history of our country.
And it was historic. Nearly every building in this area, with few exceptions, like the Samuel Butts House here on 4th Street, were burned to ashes. 1,500 buildings in all, 10,000 people homeless. But amazingly, only 2 or 3 lives lost in this fire, largely because it happened in the afternoon on a holiday when nearly everybody was outside and awake.
And what remains are really those personal accounts of the fire, newspaper clippings, letters, and essays from Portland writers that really paint a picture of what it was like on that day in 1866. A great celebration planned, a bustling city, and the one day everything changed.
The heavens gathered blackness, and a hurricane of fire swept over the city.
Prominent Portland writer John Neal wrote of the fire, saying it took 30 minutes for the people of Portland to realize what was happening.
Very few among the 30-odd thousand inhabitants of our prosperous and beautiful city took the trouble of ascertaining for themselves what the danger was, or which way the wind blew. Then came the crash of walls, the screams of women and children, the blowing up of buildings, heavy explosions.
A cataclysmic event documented by writers and journalists.
Some of the newspapers were able to borrow small presses, and within a day or two after the fire, they began to print these handbill type newspapers giving information about the fire.
The air was thick with burning flakes of wood, and people's clothes would have great holes burned in them as they moved along.
At least 2 lives lost, thousands of people running for their safety. Writer and poet Henry Wadsworth Longfellow's home was spared, but he describes the destruction just steps from his home down Center Street.
Desolation, desolation, desolation.
And he writes back to Cambridge and says, walking through the ruins of Portland, I feel like I am in Pompeii.
Perhaps one of the more emotional accounts was from John Marshall Brown, the son of John Bundy Brown and owner of Brown's Sugar House.
John Marshall Brown writes a letter to his fiancée, who's living in Washington, D.C. at the time, talking about his experiences and how he heard about the fire and a rush to the Portland Sugar House in an effort to save his family's business.
For 5 hours, Brown and several others tried to fight the fire, suffering burns and bruises and blackened with ash. Everything was destroyed.
After the sugar house was gone, we looked about us. No words can describe the awful grandeur of the scene. As far as we could see to the northeast, every building was on fire.
The only thing saved from the Brown Sugar House, these papers.
They're newspapers and kind of ephemeral pieces, probably not what he would have liked to have saved, but as anyone who's experienced a fire, a tragedy, you just sort of grab whatever you can and you rush out.
Few artifacts are left behind from the Great Fire. Pieces of a church, a bell.
We have a child's shoe that was saved from one of the burnt buildings, and I think that really kind of speaks volumes and tells a different piece of history than something in print or a photograph or a painting.
Scarcely any possessions and no place to call home.
Can you imagine walking around Portland the day after the fire and thinking, oh my gosh, this is our whole story?
Portland in ruins. The day after the fire, residents set up shelter around the Eastern Cemetery.
The Army was able to send 1,500 surplus tents, and those tents were immediately erected on the slopes of Munjoy Hill in what was called the Tent City.
Food was distributed at the old City Hall. The city really coming together.
Well, I think the fire was a truly transformative event for Portland. 10,000 people were left homeless. Almost the entire downtown was burned.
But the people regrouped. And with visions of recovery, they soon built an even greater Portland.
Up next, after a furious fire, a furious effort to rebuild, we look at the landmarks lost, those rebuilt, and how it happened so quickly.
The motto of Portland is in Latin, resurgam, which means I will rise again.
Rising from the ashes, how much of Portland today bears the legacy of this fire? The rebuilding effort that would shape the city for the better, coming up on this special report, The Great Portland Fire.
Welcome back. It is a beautiful view from here on top of the Portland Observatory, a landmark that just barely survived the Great Fire of 1866. Now, anybody standing right here the morning after would have seen two things. First off, devastation all the way from here to the waterfront near what is now the Casco Bay Bridge, but also immediate efforts to try to rebuild.
July 5th, 1866, a huge section of Portland lay in ruins. But it would not stay that way for long.
And immediately, all around Maine, sympathy and help started to arrive. Some trains set out that night during the fire.
And they got their first look at some of the landmarks saved, like the observatory, which still stands today.
People were pouring water down the side of the building. So they were protecting the building from the sparks and the effects of the fire coming up the hill. Another amazing save is the Abyssinian Meeting House, which is the third oldest African-American meeting house in the country.
On Congress Street, the Longfellow House survives, as does the historic First Parish Church.
The fire missed the Longfellow House on Congress Street by 40 feet, stayed on the opposite side of Congress Street. Then the wind blew it across Congress, and it consumed the City Hall.
And the fire went right through that building and just left the wall standing.
City Hall was gone, as was the Victorian-style post office just down the street, and the beautiful Customs House along the waterfront, destroyed and replaced by what you see today. In fact, efforts to clear debris, to redesign and rebuild these landmarks began immediately.
A great deal of money was sent in from all over the United States. Of course, in those days, there was no FEMA, there was no federal emergency, and so the city had to take charge of its situation, use whatever means it could, and this literally happened immediately after the fire.
Immediately, architects from around the east of the United States arrived in Portland. Buildings started to take shape, largely of stone, many of them very beautiful buildings.
And in that reconstruction, the city would apply newly created building codes and higher quality materials. The result, the Old Port as we know it today, carefully planned and surprisingly uniform. Large brick buildings like what you see on Middle Street, all built within a year of the fire.
So in other communities, you might have a longer period of history that's reflected in their downtown, but our Old Port was pretty much built in that post-1866 era.
And a lot of it went up between the fire and the fall. By Thanksgiving, many people were eating in their brand new homes and working in brand new offices.
It was the spirit of the city that drove that revitalization, the will of the people to rise up from the ashes.
And really, the whole fabric of the city changed, and many of those changes are what shaped the city we live in today.
Portland, Maine, a vibrant coastal city with a thriving working waterfront, attracting visitors to its food scene, art, culture, and beautiful scenery. A trendy city moving forward while maintaining roots in the 19th century.
The whole pattern, the whole configuration, the whole development of the peninsula is a direct result of the rebuilding of the city 150 years ago.
In July of 1866, Portland was a blank slate. The fire gave the city a chance to reinvent itself.
The residential activity that had been in the downtown largely left the very center of the city. The very center of the city was rebuilt almost entirely commercially and institutionally.
The downtown shifted from India Street to the Old Port. Residents moved east and west.
The middle class and the more affluent moved westward to Deering Street and to the Western Promenade. The more working people built their homes in the Munjoy Hill area.
The overall layout of Portland largely remains the same that we see today, with some tweaks. Streets like Franklin were all widened and lengthened. The land bounded by Franklin, Congress, Federal, and Pearl was turned into an urban park.
They built Lincoln Park as a fire break, so the park was there not only for public recreation, but also as a practical purpose. So if there were another fire, the fire would stop at that park.
Other safety measures went into effect that are still used today. By 1868, a central water system was put in place, piping water from Sebago Lake.
It was very important in Portland to get a source of water. At the fire, because the fire started on July 4th, it was at low tide, the water source was the ocean. So the city realized they had to have a better and more reliable source of water.
Over the next year, new fire stations were built and equipment was upgraded. Portland installed a citywide fire alarm system, 26 street boxes, gongs at each firehouse, and 2 church bells, all connected by wire. The city, rising from its ashes, would be ready if anything happened again.
If you look at the city seal, the motto of Portland is in Latin, resurgam, which means I will rise again.
Coming up, a city better protected. We look at whether a major fire like this could ever happen again in Portland.
And the last surviving house, the home in the heart of Munjoy Hill with an unlikely story to tell. That's ahead on the Great Portland Fire.
The city of Portland evolved after the Great Fire, and so did the city's fire department. Thanks to better technology, communication, and more hands on deck, a fire like 1866 would have a different outcome if it had happened today.
When a fire breaks out, we depend on firefighters and first responders to protect us.
That's our number one priority, is just to make sure everybody's out.
Portland firefighters respond to about 20 to 30 significant fires in the city per year. Each one is a learning experience.
So if we can know how they started, why they started, in the future we can prevent them from happening again.
Like the Great Fire of 1866. The assistant fire chief says there's always the potential for a large-scale fire, but the outcome would likely be different.
So now we have like direct contact, like, a fire alarm system goes directly to our dispatch center, and within seconds we are getting, notified. Plus, our technology is so much better as well.
A quicker response and more resources. At any given time, there are 55 firefighters on duty, and there's always backup. 9 fire stations are spread out strategically in the city, including a marine division on the water.
If it's on the waterfront, obviously we'd be coming from both. They have the capabilities of pumping the water right out of the ocean, so they can, they have an endless water supply on their end of things.
He says the addition of sprinklers and fire alarms in buildings can also help save lives and buildings. And news travels faster now, alerting people of a disaster earlier.
Another area that's seen a lot of change over the past 150 years, Munjoy Hill.
And what was once a location largely for the working class has become a highly desirable location. And right here on Congress Street is an unassuming house with a big secret.
This is the Anne Freeman House, built in 1855. It is the first female-owned house in the entire city of Portland. And in 2015, it was placed on the National Register of Historic Places. The house was one of only a handful of properties on the hill to survive the fire, credited in large part to its brick construction. But it's what's inside the home that really draws the eye.
The house features a lot of the original moldings and architecture. The windows have been replaced, but the staircase, the moldings in the living room, the double marble fireplaces are all original.
And all examples of a switch from Greek Revival to an Italianate architecture.
It's very, very good condition for the age. I mean, there's really very little restoration that we needed to do.
The property is now for sale, available for a homeowner with a true appreciation for the past.
Coming up, history on display.
The Great Fire images now on exhibit and where you can see them.
In just a couple of hours, the skies will be lit with bright colors and loud fireworks over the Eastern Prom in Casco Bay. 150 years ago, plans for a big celebration were scrapped after what's believed to be a lone firework touched off the biggest fire Portland has ever seen.
Some of the fireworks for that celebration got caught in the path of the fire and exploded. Now, the other ones were dumped in the bay in disgust, and Portland later banned personal fireworks. Today, that ban still exists.
Fireworks have been a long-standing tradition on the 4th of July, celebrating America's independence. But the use and sale of fireworks depends largely on where you are. In many Maine cities, you can buy and use fireworks. In Portland, you can't. Portland's assistant fire chief says safety is their biggest concern.
We're the most heavily populated city. We have closed buildings that are right nearby, and we just felt it's best to not have fireworks at all, to be quite honest with you.
Statistics show thousands of fireworks-related injuries are reported every year. And the most recent data collected by the National Fire Protection Agency shows fireworks caused nearly 18,000 fires in 2011. Much like in 1866, weather can play a big role. The assistant fire chief says wind and dry conditions can fuel a fire, turning a happy event into a tragic one.
There's so much to learn and see of the Great Fire of Portland.
And many of those documents and paintings are on display right now at the Maine Historical Society right here in Portland. That exhibit is called Images of Destruction.
It includes a series of 4 paintings from the fire, as well as a handful of items saved from burning buildings.
Now, perhaps the biggest draw, dozens of lithographs taken by photographers around New England.
Those photographs, I think, will really resonate with people. I think people will really get an opportunity to see, in what was a new medium at the time, the devastation of Exchange Street, of 4th Street, of Commercial Street, and areas that are now successfully rebuilt.
The exhibit is open to the public through the end of October.
We thank you for joining us for this special report, The Great Portland Fire.
We hope you have a safe and happy 4th of July as we celebrate our nation's 240th birthday.